Welcome everyone to the Human Security for All campaign panel on mobility and human security. This is the fourth year that the World Academy of Art and Science, in conjunction with CES, has been at the show. 4 years ago, Gary Shapiro, the CEO of CES, realized the value of putting a human rights type theme into CES. A lot of people looked at CES and thought it was just a show for shiny new gadgets, which it is, of course, but there was no ethical and moral angle to it. And so we were invited to partner with CES to talk about human-centered design, human-centered tech, and AI and products. And so each year we host a few panels. I'm delighted today to introduce 3 experts in their field on mobility and mobility financing to explore the concept of what that looks like. On my left, I have Lawrence Ford, who is also known as the Shaman of Wall Street. He's the founder of Conscious Capital Foundation. We have Sujata Sridharan, who's the senior software engineer of Bolt Financial. And we have Salika Talbot, who is the CEO and founder of Autonomous Vehicle Consulting. When people talk about human security, they always ask, what does that mean? It's a person-centered approach to security. You'll notice around the world, the countries that have the most military security around them are usually the ones that are the poorest on the inside. Seems to be an ongoing trend. So the human security angle is to really look at how you build it from the inside out, from looking at the well-being of people, the abundance that comes from looking after individuals first, and how that radiates outwards. So a lot of people say to me, well, mobility and human security, how does that interface? There was an interesting comment I was discussing earlier with Lawrence, that every crisis in the world started as a mobility problem. If you look at war, people are on the move, you have refugees. If you look at an economic crisis, people are migrating for work. If you look at health, we can all recall COVID, there was lockdown, there was a lack of mobility. If you think of climate events, many of you might have heard of the Aral Sea disaster, which was the world's 4th biggest lake, which dried up through mismanagement. A whole region lost its economic benefits and people had to reinvent themselves economically. So mobility takes various forms. Everyone always thinks about motor vehicles and autonomous driving vehicles, but when it comes to human security, it's a much broader discussion. So I would like to start from left to right here, just allow Lawrence to give an introduction about his work and some thoughts on how human security interface with the topic we're going to talk today.
Hi, Lawrence Ford with Conscious Capital Foundation, and as introduced, I'm not your normal character called the Shaman of Wall Street. I focus on the nexus of conscious capital and technology, and what may sound a little bit ethereal, I do that for a reason, because I feel those are our 3 biggest tools we have in our bag as a species, and if we want to change the world, we might as well leverage our most powerful tools. Our consciousness, everything we think and do before it manifests into the world. Capital, this most recent tool that we've invented as a species, which drives so much of our behavior. And technology here at CES, which is the most amazing thing that can scale us. And in the advent of artificial intelligence, we're talking about Moore's law getting eaten for lunch with the scalability of what was once 2 years in improvements to now every 2 months or so with artificial intelligence. So I also have recently had my next book published called The World Doesn't Need You, The End of Work, Reclaiming Purpose in the Age of AI. And as it relates to mobility, there isn't much that isn't involving mobility, especially as it relates to capital. And I think the theme for me on this panel is really mobility is an early indicator of issues around economic and capital problems. And so if we want to look at early indicators in a general sense, we look at what might not be working inside of a society as it relates to mobility. And that's a pretty good sign that there's some fragility in that country.
Thank you so much for that. Following up from there, my name is Sujata, Sridharan, and I'm a senior engineer at Bolt Financial. I typically work on building large-scale distributed systems for financial systems, and I happen to think that mobility is really just on the flip side of that same coin. When we're talking about financial systems and money, we're talking about things that impact people on a day-to-day basis. And mobility, on the other side of the coin, is about how people move through their life, like through these solutions, public transportation, private, whatever form it may take. And it's about like a set of ecosystems that come together and that need to function reliably and predictably so people are able to like accomplish their day-to-day tasks. And on this panel, I hope to explore like some overlap between these concepts and also talk about how we can engineer for these and bring like human-centered design right to the forefront.
Thank you. I just want to say how excited I am for the conversation. I do a panel probably every week, and it's never started out human-centric. I'm usually having to force that into the equation, so it's exciting that this is why we're here. My name is Salika Josiah Talbot. I am a transportation technology evangelist. Transportation is mobility, and mobility is freedom. I trademarked that phrase because it is the center of the work that I do. I'm excited about all forms of new technology. I want to see flying helicopters. I want to see autonomous vehicles in every community moving people safely to where they have to go. If mobility is the movement of people, goods, and information, and either you go to the thing or the thing comes to you, in any way, shape, or form that we have new technology and we are not centering people in that, then we're not providing freedom. We are, in fact, gating people's movement. We are often layering new technology on systems that already don't work for people. If you were in a wheelchair and you wanted to get around mid-Los Angeles, go a mile or so, you would find yourself periodically having to go into the street in order to move down a roadway. That is not mobility, yet we have Waymo operating in that space, and we have eVTOL companies that are having contracts signed. I want to evangelize for mobility that's going to work for us no matter who we are, no matter where we live, no matter what we do. That is the only way that we provide true transportation for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Salika. I'd like to start off to follow that thought of yours. How do we achieve that? There are lots of grand statements around, getting equity for everybody in terms of moving from A to B. It's a complicated process, and you've got public and private considerations to think of, many people to win over before you get that win. So from your perspective, where do you start? How do you start designing a system that's human-centric?
I want to back up a little in case you all think I'm Pollyanna and I just left my braids at home and I don't understand the reality of how the world works. I was a trial lawyer in New York for about 20 years. I then was the chief operating officer of New Jersey's Motor Vehicle Commission. And then I was the director of field for the United States in charge of the enforcement of all large trucks and buses, and eventually the senior advisor to FMCSA at the United States Department of Transportation. I understand mobility, I understand policy, and I understand the law. And as I was saying when we met with the panel earlier, one of the things that's really clear to me, having been a trial lawyer, is I understand what moves people. We are not moving the equation when it comes to people. The industry talks to itself. I talk to you, you talk to me, we're doing a great thing, we pat each other on the back, and it all seems wonderful. But the person on the street has no idea about what's happening in this room. The reporting out that's going to occur, The majority of it is going to be on places like MarketWatch and CNBC. The general public is not watching that. So the failing is we're not having conversations where we need to have them. We are not engaging with community. Second, legislators, they do make decisions. Elected officials, appointed officials, they make decisions. Guess what? They don't understand it either. And the powers that be, generally the pocketbook, the dollars, right? The people who are influencing and lobbying, it's not necessarily to their best interest for us to meet these mobility needs. We have to take campaign to the streets. Pick me, I'm gonna be queen for the day, or I like to say empress better. Empress for the day. I want a Super Bowl commercial. We explain to the world at the same time so everybody hears the same exact message, the benefits of new technology. Then we also explain, if you have better connectivity, you have better security. If you stripe and pave your roads and take care of your sidewalks and put your emphasis of your dollars in those spaces, they will pay dividends to a community. If people can't get someplace by walking, then they have to take the train or the bus or a ride share. Some people want to walk, but if walking is impossible, we need to figure out how to help them walk. If you want to take the bus, but the bus is dirty or the bus doesn't run on time, we have to figure out how to get the bus to run on time. Buses don't have to run till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. We can infuse rideshare into public transit and have public-private partnerships as we do in places all over the state of Florida and Texas and many other parts of the world. It's not impossible. We lack the will and or the knowledge about the problem and some of the solutions that exist already.
Thank you. I'm the general manager of the World Academy of Art and Science. It was founded in 1960 by Robert Oppenheimer and Albert Einstein, among others. And the role of the organization was to learn a lesson from history, that be careful what you bring into the world. Because once the genie's out the bottle, as you know, it's very difficult to get back in. I'd like to ask Sujata, who's a qualified engineer by profession, how you look at designing human-centric systems. I read the other day that in Europe, the EV bikes have created a pandemic of deaths and disabilities from all the accidents. You know, electric bikes sounded like a great idea once upon a time, but what's happening is they're getting bigger, more powerful, heavier, and if one of those hit you, you're not going to walk away very easily. So what kind of foresight do you build into your planning?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. My answer actually ties into a lot of amazing points brought up by Salika as well about building safety and thinking about like mobility problems more actively. But I think it all just comes down to human-centered design. And by that, what I mean is when we are building out this technology, it's quite often we zero in on like an ideal user profile or ideal conditions. What does the environment look like typically in certain parts of the country? And then we try to roll out this solution globally. And obviously that is not going to work because local environments are different, people are different, they move through cities differently. So what this means is we have to think about like human-centered design, like being aware of the constraints and the local conditions, and also factoring that in like right from day one. So you're no longer building for an ideal user or an ideal environment, but you're building for like a broad set of users in different environments, and you're building a system that is able to gracefully fail and degrade and adapt to these and is effectively elastic. And touching upon the point about the EV bikes, probably a counter example that I can provide, like with autonomous ride-sharing solutions like Waymo, for instance, solve some of these problems by actually embedding human in the loop. What that means is even though you don't have drivers at the wheels, you still have like people who are qualified out in offices handling regulation, safety, able to step in if they need to, and they're effectively acting as the failure handling layer. And just thinking about all of these upfront can greatly resolve the issues that you see when you start adapting and deploying these autonomous solutions out on the road.
Can I just comment on that a little further? I think those are wonderful points. One of the things I want to infuse in the conversation, I teach transportation technology and the future of mobility at USC. And my class is, it's a senior level class. I ask my students at the beginning of the year a variety of questions. One of the things I ask them is, what are the rules around scooters and stop signs, e-bikes, bicycles, and stop signs? And you know what they tell me? There are no rules. Excuse me?
I'd fail that one.
Right, so this is the problem.
I was getting nervous you're going to ask me.
The first thing we do as human beings when we start to leave the house, we move through society and no one tells us that there are rules for walking, there are rules for riding. When you're on an e-bike, when you're on a bicycle, when you're on a scooter, guess what? The stop sign applies to you too. Most people don't know that. You can make a human-centered design all you want, but if you do not educate people on the thing that they are using, if we don't require education, I beg of you, whoever here is in a classroom dealing with kindergartner through third graders, implement mobility conversations with those kids. It's not enough to say, we go on the green and we stop on red. It's not enough to say that. We are not teaching people how to move, and we're throwing in all this wonderful new technology, and no one has been instructed how to use it. Of course, we're killing people. Human-centered, important, education, a must.
No, that is absolutely true, and I think that kind of leads back to how we think about technology, right? Technology is so pervasive, we think it's super intelligent, especially AI, it talks to us as if it's human, so it's easy to just think, oh, it can comprehend everything. But technology ultimately operates on the data that we provided, so if our rules are imperfect, if we are not able to understand and educate ourselves, and we are not going to be able to program this technology to perform the right way. So it's very important to understand for ourselves what we're operating with so we can actually provide the right instructions and set ourselves up for success.
I don't think we're going to give you a chance to ask another question, because I'd like to jump in on that too. I wasn't really kidding when I said I wouldn't know the rules, and I do have an EV bike, so I'm going to pay attention to rules. But it's such a good point, because as we enter the age of as we are deep into the age of AI, things are scaling faster than ever. And that includes rules that need to help govern those things. But even deeper, if we take it into a little bit of a deeper conversation, AI really is just a mirror. So it is accelerating everything it knows, which is what we have taught it, which is the consciousness we've come from as a species. And so, like an EV bike, if my rules prior on a regular bike were stop sign, really, right? It's a lot less dangerous than it is now on an EV bike. And that's an example of technology in a very, very fundamental, grounded way of how it scales so quick that we have to keep up with that. And I really appreciate you bringing up that point, and I will do my homework. Promise.
There's obviously a disconnect between the pace of innovation and legislation. As we know, the private sector moves a lot faster than many governments and cities, and how we close that gap to ensure that things change at that pace, I think, is critical. But Lawrence, you're the money guy here, and somebody has to pay for all of this.
Yeah.
So what would you think would excite investors, the money markets, to support things like this? It seems to be, if you look at the history of mobility, it's very set. Look at how difficult it's been to change people from gasoline to electric, for instance. It's been a seismic shift. So how does the money slot into that idea and equation? How do you get people excited to really fund things like this, and why should they fund it?
Yeah, look, it's a great question, which is if we're not including capital in the game, we're just kidding ourselves. So, we need to, as they say, follow the money, right? So if our incentive is efficiency, then it's going to focus on scale. How do we scale? If, the incentive is profit, it's going to take care of the elite. And, you know, if the incentive is human-centric care and love and appreciation, all those little soft things that Wall Street doesn't do so well because the incentives aren't aligned. But if it becomes that, then we can use this expansion of intelligence and technology to really make things work. But I think it's really, really important. You know, I've been doing this gig for 30 years plus, and heard lots of great ideas. But if you're not following the money, you're deluding yourself. So what we need to do is we need to find out how we incorporate Wall Street and wisdom to dance together. And there are ways to do that. But we cannot avoid talking the money game, because, you know, it's not like let's just throw it all to public transit, because we know how that goes down, right? And it's not about let's just all throw it to private industry, because we know where that scales. So there's a private dance, and my guess is you've spent a little bit of time looking at this.
Well, you know I like green, right? The ideas I think that we're trying to promote are not antithetical to people making money. I did a conference in Germany probably about 4 years ago, and the iPod creator was in the room, and he liked to talk about early adopters and late adopters for new technology. I truthfully hate those terminologies, and this is why. He's really excited about the early adopters. And I explained to him the problem with that concept, the problem with marketing just for rich people, is there's never enough rich people for this kind of stuff. There just isn't.
No scale.
Right? If you want to make money on this, it has to be ubiquitous. It's like the iPod or the iPhone isn't making money until everybody has one in their hand. If we want autonomy to be a thing that makes Wall Street lots of money, we have to figure out how to service humanity.
Can I add something in this conversation? Sure. Because if, how do I say this politely? I don't. I've given up saying it. I've been giving up saying polite about Wall Street. Wall Street doesn't think too deeply. So, you know, the question really is, you know, again, going back to the incentives, but what does incentives follow? Incentives follow things we can measure, right? So if we can't measure it, it's out of the equation. So the question I have for all of us on the panel when it comes to mobility is, how do we begin to measure things that matter that then can get applied to the economic policies and the legislative policies beyond just scale and profit?
If I use the AV,
thought you might have an answer for this,
to get to work, if more people can get to a job and they're doing it through autonomy, then Wall Street's making more money because the businesses are having more customers, they're serving more people, it's more dollars in their pockets.
If I can get to my healthcare checkups earlier.
I was getting there.
We talked about earlier,
if
right?
Granny is only seeing an acute care need, she probably won't make it. But if Granny's seen every single month for maintenance care, it's actually cheaper for the healthcare system. It's less stress on our medical care providers. If we think about food, if my food is moving autonomously from the West Coast to the East Coast, and it can get there faster, it has greater nutritional value to the people who are eventually going to eat that food. Importantly, community. I mean, I could talk about education, housing, jobs, healthcare, community. We know that we have an aging population in the United States. People are retiring, and what are they going to do? I don't want to just sit, I love my husband, but I want to talk to other people.
By 2030, 1 in 6 people will be over age 60.
Correct.
In the world.
How do we still be in community with each other? Your peripheral vision for driving, I'm going to say this as Mrs. Motor Vehicle, changes after 40. After 40.
I think in Jersey it's like 30. Just saying. Anybody driven to Jersey before?
Be nice.
That was a big job, by the way. I don't know how you did that. Sorry.
We called it wisdom behind the wheel. And the reason that the same thing like this is storytelling to get people to understand. Your peripheral vision is changing. There are things that you can do. We're not taking your keys. What we are doing is explaining what are the best times for you to drive. How often should you see your doctor? What are the ways that you can do exercises to increase your peripheral? The things that we do that help humanity. It's the same thing with autonomous vehicles. Could you imagine if you have Medicaid or Medicare and getting to and from your doctor's appointment is built-in service? When people miss their appointments, it's not because they want to. How do I get there? Now you've backed up a schedule for a doctor. You've created, issues with your medical care. But if the vehicle comes and picks you up, takes you there, and brings you back home, healthcare is still cheaper. Wall Street can measure that data. Wall Street can measure that restaurants are open and people are being served and people are making money. When you go to a restaurant and there's seats that are empty and they tell you you have to wait, it's because they don't have enough staff. And it's not that people don't want to work. Again, I've lived in New York, Washington, D.C., and now I live in Los Angeles. When you live 25 miles out from someplace in L.A., that's a 2-hour ride. You want to get to work, but how? These are things that technology can conquer and that are measurable.
Yeah.
Zulika, can I quickly just comment on that? The thing that comes to mind when you speak like that is adoption. So before you needed a vehicle and a tank of gas. Now you need an app, a password, Wi-Fi, connectivity, a preloaded amount possibly. There are a lot more barriers, and everything's becoming, if we talk about tech and AI, that's where everything's moving. Everything's becoming an app. So before you can move anywhere or do anything these days, you need to have signed up for a service. How do we make that easier? How do you build relationships and collaborations with like-minded companies that are in that same field? How do you overcome it? And I'd like to hear from you too.
Yeah, I can take that. I think this goes back to some of the things we spoke about earlier, which is like questioning our baselines and our assumptions. Like you pointed out, some of the things that a lot of companies by default assume in the United States is smartphone ownership or digital literacy or even just access to like consistent connectivity. But we have seen examples of this being solved across the world in more like constraint-driven environments. So in South Asia, for instance, like ride-sharing apps like have like shared devices outside transportation hubs, and even helpers who can help you if you're not like digitally literate in order to use that app. So there are ways that even the same companies that operate here solve these problems elsewhere. So the idea is we just want to bring that in and like stop assuming that these are our baselines and start questioning and thinking, well, if we remove this, what do we have instead? How do we still provide the net crucial feature over here? And I think that would really help. And also, just kind of, since we've spoken a little bit about data as well, data doesn't have to be the enemy for money. Like, we're still talking about things Wall Street can understand, like user acquisition, how do we expand to like emerging markets? And in order to like address both of these, you do need like human-centered design, because otherwise, what is the necessity for anyone to adapt these solutions? So I think there is like just a little bit of out-of-the-box thinking over here that we need to bring into this environment.
Would you like to?
No, I concur. There are examples across the globe of the way that other countries use technology. When the US was beginning to fumble with Venmo, Kenya had been using M-Pesa for years, and you could find a granny on the street, I love using that term, granny, a granny on the street who could use M-Pesa to either give you some change to go to school or put gas in the tank or pay a bill. The world has looked at this differently. I think the United States uses this as a crutch very often. We know other places as well. It's not just the US, but often as a crutch against making strides in this space. We have provided cell phones for communities that don't have them. We have tons of community service projects across the nation that could go into homes and teach people how to use these. And there are people who are going to be afraid. Of course they are. That's why you need community toolkits to explain benefits so that people stop fearing and begin to embrace what it will do for them. And if you build it into Medicaid and Medicare, guess what? They'll get in that autonomous vehicle. gone off the rails.
Yeah, well, bring us back. So I know we're a little bit tighter on time at the end here, but I'd like to end with, on my part, a little bit with just maybe something a little bit depressing and then very positive. You know, when we talk about Wall Street, I don't believe that you know, Wall Street follows the money. The way that our world works today and our economic systems are based on quarterly returns, not long-term thinking. So as much as we'd like those metrics to be included, even when we can measure them, don't have a lot of faith in it. You know, when we talk about things that are excluded, you know, one particular example is like, what's a whale worth? I can tell you what it's worth dead, about $40,000. What's it worth alive? If anybody knows about whales, they do this thing called the whale pump. And through that process, phytoplankton is about 40% of our oxygen in the world. So, you know, if you do the math and still want to breathe, it's at least $2 million, not 40,000. So the metrics are all off. So I don't have a lot of faith in Wall Street for this. But here's where I feel very, very positive. I know, it's a big term, but I know and feel deeply that artificial intelligence is going to, our technology is going to, despite Wall Street, scale us out of this problem. Because we're going to move abundance to a massive level, and that includes mobility. So moving people around and the automation of moving people around, I think is going to just absolutely blow our minds and give us the ability to scale us out of this problem despite Wall Street. And for people like you on the policy side and otherwise shepherding this work, and you in the programming and the technology side, you know, are our future, because that true action is how it's going to happen together despite Wall Street.
So Lika, I've seen some incredible solutions around the world in far-flung places that somebody's already cracked the code or worked out a formula on how to solve a problem. I spoke to a Central African farmer once who was advising a salmon farm in Scotland. You wouldn't think that a solution would come out of a place like that, but what underrated, sort of hidden solutions, because ultimately we want to see solutions. We all know what the problems are. We can talk endlessly about that. But what have you seen that you think has got the potential, the seed to grow into something much bigger from anywhere in the world?
First, it's one of my favorite stats to give when I'm speaking. The average person in the United States is 38. The average age of someone in Japan is 48, and the average age of a person on the continent of Africa is 19. That should make you go, wow. They're young, they're curious, they're inventive, they hold the world's resources in terms of minerals, and there's so much taking place on the continent, from the tip of South Africa all the way up to North Africa. Lots of wonderful things taking place in the Middle East. I was in Dubai, I was gonna say last year, I was in Dubai in 2024, and I was impressed by the transit, but it's still only serving certain people during certain hours in certain ways. I was in Riyadh in mid-December, just a couple of weeks ago. 2030 in Riyadh is going to change the world, because we're going to see what is possible. Now, this is what is possible under, I said it should be done and it'll be done, and I have more money than I can ever spend in my lifetime, so we'll spend whatever it costs. But they are building from the ground up in connection with ancient city. So they haven't, you know, they didn't come in and raise their history and their culture. Building alongside of it technology and mobility that will move people in community where no one will own their own personal vehicle. That is not a pie in the sky. That is 2030 in Riyadh. Those types of things are happening. Port movement in China is outstanding. When the problems we're having in the US and around the world, they're not having at ports in China. They have built, they have understood how technology can improve the movement of goods in those spaces. When we think about farming, what autonomy will do in farming and has begun to do, we don't have enough. Every time someone says AV's taking a job, it's taking a job, who do you know who's a farmer? Who do you know who's out there picking crop? Who do you know personally? Who do you know personally that is going down in a mine and retrieving minerals? Who do you know personally? We need the minerals, we need the food. Somebody needs to do it. We are aging out as a society. Autonomy is going to help us live and live better. Those things are not only happening 5, 10, 15 years from now. The great work in mining and in farming is starting to take place today and will only continue to improve. I think those are the kinds of things that should make us feel somewhat settled about what AI is doing for us as a society.
Sujata, I'd like to ask you, if you look at any major city in the world, Mumbai, Lagos, in Nigeria, or even Los Angeles, the gridlock is crazy. I don't know how anyone moves around anymore. It's obviously become inefficient rather than more efficient. So surely putting more vehicles on the road is not the solution. We've seen flying cars at CES, which might be one solution. But what are your thoughts on the future? How do we move into mobility for everyone with a human-centered approach, but at the same time being realistic about the resources we have?
Yeah, so I think with the advent of AI, and since we're talking about autonomous vehicles as well, they can actually really complement some of the problems that we're seeing. And they can step in places where we are perhaps lacking resources or lacking skill over there. And what I see is a future where we work alongside these solutions. For example, we spoke about seniors getting to their healthcare appointments. One way to leverage would be thinking about AI to handle the orchestration and coordination, providing the connectivity necessary if there's no direct solution for accessing the appointment, and just being inventive about where we use these solutions and how we use them so that we can effectively build a mobility ecosystem that works for us.
Thank you. Lawrence, there's a creative approach to transportation and mobility as well, which I'd love to hear your thoughts on. There is a new autonomous vehicle transport at Heathrow Airport in London, and you have these aging executives queuing up. They park 2 miles away just for the joy of taking the autonomous vehicle to the airport. And they will not go to the parking garage. They want to take this thing. How important is the human spirit in creating something exciting that people really desire, rather than just it making sense, both monetary sense and common sense? There's obviously a creative approach to how you approach something which is desirable. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a brilliant question, because as we exit what I call the age of knowledge, which AI is taking over handily for us right now. What's left? What's left when a machine can do everything better than us from cognitive labor? And a lot of it left is our human spirit, our emotion, our wisdom. We call it our wisdom advantage. And a lot of that comes in the creativity of design and spirit and music and fun and enjoyment, right? And all those things we get to live as these complicated, human species. And so the design of these, look, I'm probably a big surprise to everybody in the audience at this point after 40 minutes. I'm a kid at heart. And I see one of those things and I'm like, yes, let me get into one of those. This looks like fun. And to a degree, we all live that way. And then there's the other side of the emotion of creating these vehicles. Now, I said something earlier about how 1 in 6 people on this planet, and we know the disparities. I mean, Africa, we could talk about Africa for a while. Africa is going to be the whole real deal in about 10, 15 years, man. We don't figure out Africa, we got nothing figured out. But when we go to the 1 in 6 people in the globe being 60 and over, how many of the audience out here has ever had a parent that either couldn't drive anymore or had their license taken away? Raise your hand. It's terrible. I mean, it's like the worst thing. It's your autonomy. It's your ability to move around. I'm telling you right now, in a couple of years, that won't happen anymore. a couple years. I think I'm a really good driver, but I don't drive myself much anymore. I really don't. Unfortunately, you know, my car can do better than me. And pretty soon, the parents, our parents, the elderly, there's within 2 years, no longer is that going to happen. And that's a really emotional thing that obviously the design and the delivery and the care of how that human interface happens, which is really important with the work both of you do, is going to matter. But that's gone. 2 years.
I'll be 60 in 2 years.
How old?
60.
Catching up to me.
Yeah, so I don't...
It's real, right?
I don't drive a car now, right? And I don't want to drive a car. I enjoy getting in my Waymo and going to the airport, because that's about as far as I'm going. These things are critical, especially if you understand, for those, when your parent can't drive anymore, they're at a point where it takes away almost this will of living. Their community is taken from them. You've aged them, and now what is their worth living for? And when you give them back the ability to go where they want, when they want, you will see a revitalization of people over 60 like I'll be.
We're at the end of our time for our session, so thank you very much. And I think it's been a fantastic conversation into the future of human-centric mobility. So thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you to our audience for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.